Arts Alliance, and I have the pleasure and opportunity to moderate this second panel. And we're going to do this panel just a little bit differently. I really want to make sure there's a lot of opportunity for Q&A. So I will make my remarks quite brief, turn it over to the three panelists. They will each do relatively brief presentations, and then we really want to open it up to the floor for Q&A. So, as you know, Dr. Kleinberg earlier presented the overall findings of this survey, and just a minute ago we heard from the field about changing demographics and both challenges and opportunities. And I really wish we would have had more time for conversations around that. That's a full-day conversation. One of the, just as a fast aside, one of the things that I thought was most interesting was when Maria said that right now there's about 5% of all arts funding goes to Latino-based arts organizations. That in itself is such a topic for conversation. Huge challenge for us, especially in a city like Houston going forward. This study is full of information like that if we really take control of this study and work with the Kinder Institute to really wrestle these findings and advance the findings, prioritize them, and set an agenda for ourselves here in this community, we can really set forth I should say advance the change that is already happening in our community. This panel is all out-of-towners. How about that? So we have a group of three panelists who have been working in arts education, lifelong learning in the arts, in the arts, and cultural planning. And the reason why we asked the three of them to join us is because we really wanted to take a bit of this time and look forward. And given the study, what are just a few highlights of this study that we can start to consider for our own city? We all know that we've done, this city is a very different city than it was 5, 10, and 15 years ago culturally, institutionally, educationally, and economically, and we all know that we've been rather successful in comparison to other United States cities. However, there are some models in other cities that we can learn from, especially in the areas of arts education. And we also know that cities across the globe have been very rigorous in planning. Planning is not a word that we love in Houston. However, cultural planning is a different animal and a different beast. Some of you might know that Houston went through a cultural planning process about 15 years ago, and out of that came, among other things, our civic art program. What's interesting in that plan, though, is that the real priorities were a public art program, more public funding for the arts, and arts education. So everything and nothing changes. So today I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to talk a little bit about their experience in lifelong learning in the arts, arts education, and cultural planning, and then open up to a conversation with all of you. I am very pleased to start the conversation with Douglas Dempster. Doug is the Dean of the College of Fine Arts at the University of Texas at Austin. Previously, he served as the Dean of Academic Affairs at Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester. With a background in philosophy and humanities, Professor Dempster has authored many publications dealing with aesthetics, music style and theory, and art criticism. He currently holds the Marie and Joseph D. Jamil Senior Regents Professorship and the Effie Marie Kane Regents Chair in the Department of Theater and Dance. Douglas?
Thanks, Jonathan. I want to talk primarily about fine arts education, but before I do, I want to congratulate the Kinder Institute and Dr. Kleinberg and the Houston foundation on this survey. I've been a student of public arts participation surveys for about 20 years, and these have been these surveys have been implemented largely by the NEA and the U.S. Census for something like 30 years, so there's a huge amount of data out there. And I can tell you this is a very well put together survey. It actually confirms a lot of what we know and expect about arts participation in the United States. Some of this is not a surprise. For instance, the trend towards electronic media or electronically mediated arts is a well-established trend. And the decline in live performance participation. The value that Houstonians and Americans generally put on the arts, especially in education, is huge and has been for decades. The diversification of taste is a pronounced and long-standing trend. The audience is fragmenting and becoming more omnivorous in the arts. And these are all trends that will affect our arts and cultural landscape. But there are some amazing surprises in this survey as well, some of which Dr. Kleinberg mentioned, and I'll just mention again. Houstonians have this enormously high participation rate in live performance. 40% of the respondents reported attending a live performance event. No difference by ethnicity. That's an amazing result. Once you control for educational level and income, which are the strongest predictors of arts participation nationally and in every survey that's been done. Actually, that's a reflection on Dr. Kleinberg's methodology, because actually these arts participation surveys have gotten better and better over the years, especially in eliminating bias, cultural bias and ethnic bias. And this survey does that better than most I know. So here's the one that leapt out at me. So I think Houston can not only claim to be the most diverse city in America, the coolest city in America, but it seems to me now also the most literate city in America. 60% of the respondents said that in the past year they had read a novel, a play, or a drama. I want you to think about that for a minute. 60%. That's more than the percentage of respondents who said that they had been to a live, professional, or amateur sporting event in the past year. That's an astonishing figure. It does reflect the national trend of improved literacy. I mean, literary literacy, not just ability to read. But that's quite a remarkable number. I think it ought to be studied. What really gets confirmed, and this is something we know extremely well from other studies, is that education and fine arts education is really foundational to adult engagement and participation in the arts. And that's something we know. The strongest predictor of future adult participation in the arts is educational attainment and also educational exposure to the fine arts. That's strongly confirmed by this study. And another aspect of this that is maybe less obvious to you is that educational institutions are actually providing many artistic and cultural opportunities to adults, and I should add, also to practicing professional artists and performers. That's a really important data point. Educational institutions are, in many ways, fundamental to the arts and culture in our society. I'm the dean of a College of Fine Arts, and so we're at the very advanced end of fine arts education. We're training many professionals to go out into the world as performers, actors, artists, and the like. And we worry about whether or not that's a value-added proposition for those students. And if any of you are parents of children who love the arts and wanted to major in the arts in college, you worried about it as well. Several years ago, these higher education training institutions decided we were tired of worrying about this and we needed to survey our alumni. And thanks to once again, the Houston Endowment, is there a leitmotif here? Houston Endowment, the Houston Foundation has proved very important in all this research. The Surdna Foundation, the NEA, we actually put together the funding to do a national web-based survey of all graduates of fine arts, higher education, and fine arts high schools in the country. Now, I'm supposed to click this. And?
Click the arrow. Right arrow. Right arrow. There you go.
This survey is called the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. And as you can see, this is a vast database. This past year, we surveyed 33,801 graduates of these programs. And it will be run every year, and we'll have similar samples. These graduates are asked, what are they doing? What is their income? How do they feel about their education? What kind of debt are they carrying from their education? How are they involved in the arts? It's a very, very thorough, even exhaustive and exhausting survey, as we've heard from respondents. It's the most thorough, discipline-based survey of graduates in higher education. There's nothing like it in any other discipline out there. It's enormously valuable to colleges like mine because I have feedback on what's happening to our graduates and how we can adjust our programs to serve them better. But it's also yielding important trend data nationally. So for instance, here we actually see something about where these graduates end up and where they're concentrated. What have we learned? Well, it confirms a lot of what we suspected and also explodes some myths. There's a very high degree of satisfaction among these graduates who go to these colleges of the fine arts. In fact, over 90% say that they think it was a good or excellent education and they would do it again. That's not what you would expect if they were all graduating into penury and obscurity. In fact, there's a very high degree of satisfaction. Many are going on to work as professionals in the field for which they've been trained, which one, of course, if you're a dean of a college of fine arts, you worry about that. Are we really preparing them for anything? And the answer is something on a rate of over 80%. And in many of these fields, not all of them, and if you actually control on the right for those who actually had the intention of going on to be professionals, it's over 90% are actually finding some future work at some time in their career in that art. It doesn't say how long they've been doing it or if it's their primary source of income. It doesn't control for all those variables, but it does say that they are going on to find work in their field. And they're not all poor and embittered by their choice of professions. This is actually a measure of some satisfaction. It's not as high as we'd like. We'd like 100% satisfaction with their income in the arts, but actually this compares not only well, but actually favorably with many other majors and professions in higher education. The news is not all good. The MFA, as Daniel Pink is famous for having said, is not the new MBA, not if you care about income. And students, our graduates, are moonlighting more than average. But they are unemployed at about the same rate as all other holders of bachelor's degrees. Well, I could go on about this SNAP research. It's very, very important to knowing whether or not higher education is delivering on the value of fine arts education. And the answer is, I would say, and it may be self-congratulatory, absolutely, we are. In fact, the big takeaway is that the real break in future opportunity is between those who pursue a college education, get a bachelor's degree, and those who don't. Quite independent of what your major is. Yes, if you're a major in petroleum engineering, you'll probably have a better income than if you're a dance major. But your prospects are good no matter. So from my point of view, the real question is how can we allow more students to have educational opportunity of this and other kinds in the fine arts as well as other majors. That's where I think our challenge really rests. For me, the big question in fine arts education is how can we improve access to high quality fine and performing arts education in the state? And the problem is severe here. I say Texas has some of the finest fine and performing arts education in the country in our K-12 schools. And alas, it has some of the worst. I'm going to jump ahead here. When we look at elementary schools, the College of Fine Arts has been tracking access to fine arts education in elementary, middle, and high schools for several years now, and we find enormous disparities here. And what this chart shows, and you can't possibly read it, so I apologize, is that some 29% of elementary school students have no fine arts specialist on the faculty in that school. Now, a better data point for you to consider is just page 14 of this Kinder Institute study. Look at that. 39% of the respondents in this study say that they received never involved with the arts as a child. 39%. And if you look at those with the lowest educational attainment, it's over 50%. So my question to you is, how in the world have we as a society allowed 40 to 50% of the students in our school system to get through their education without any involvement or engagement with the fine arts? That to me is an indictment of our educational system, and we have to figure out how to do better than that. Very quickly, there are a couple of programs that the College of Fine Arts is involved with in order to try to do something about that. Not only are we training professional artists and musicians and dancers, but we're also one of the largest producers of future fine arts teachers, music, theater, visual arts, and dance for the public schools of Texas. So we worry about whether or not those teachers are getting out to students who need them most. I'm going to go back now, if everything cooperates. We're engaged with a program in collaboration with the Texas Cultural Trust called Arts and Digital Literacy Initiative. And what this has done is to create a series of courses in visual arts, music, soon theater, and dance that are computer or digital-based introductions to those art forms. And it's intended, targeted as an introductory course for students from grade 9 on. We did this originally, it was the Texas Cultural Trust initiative, and they partnered with us because we wanted to bring digital literacy to students through the arts, or to introduce the arts through digital technologies to advance the arts into the 21st century. What we've learned in the process, and now the music curriculum is already launched, it's out in the schools, it's being adopted, it's approved by the Texas Education Agency. Music will be launched in both a first and second year over the next year, and theater is next in line. What we're finding is that rather than being an expensive barrier to fine arts education, because you have to have computers involved and digital cameras and that sort of thing, it's a very low cost access to fine arts education. Why? For the simple reason that a classroom with computers and digital cameras, which most high schools will now have, is much, much cheaper than running a band program or an orchestra program or even a visual arts program. This is something that can be delivered at fairly low cost and to any number of students. You don't have to have a whole marching band of 60 kids in order for this to happen. So it wasn't exactly our intention, but we're realizing that this may be one of the greatest ways of expanding access to fine arts education in schools that need it most and have it the least in Texas. The other program I'll just touch on, and then I'll finish up. We've discovered that because we train so many fine arts teachers for the schools, there's a vicious cycle out there. Every fine arts certified student has to student teach under a mentor in a school. That's the last stage before being certified. And I can tell you that those students are always apprentice placed with the best teachers in the best schools that have, what do you suppose, the very best fine arts programs. Of course, you wouldn't want to put a student teacher in a failing program. So where do those students get hired, do you suppose? So what you get is a vicious cycle. The schools that have the weakest programs, the students are least served, stay that way because they're not attracting or hiring the best teachers. And you cannot build a great fine arts program or a good math or science program without great teachers. So we've got to turn a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. We have to start placing these energetic, well-trained young music, theater, visual arts, and dance teachers in these underserved schools. We have to get them in there. We have to help bootstrap the programs. And I truly believe, that if we do that well and help them stick there, we will bootstrap or catalyze fine arts programs in the most underserved schools all over the state. That's something we're committed to doing, and we're going to need a lot of help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. So our next presenter is Laura Perille. Laura is visiting from Boston, where she's the executive director of EdVestors, a Boston-based school change organization that partners with philanthropic donors and education leaders, combining strategic private investment, education expertise, and engaged implementation support to accelerate change in urban schools. Since then, EdVestors has raised and helped invest in over $16 million in funds for urban school improvement efforts in Boston and Lowell, Massachusetts. Currently, EdVestors serves as a lead partner to the Boston Public Schools in managing the BPS Arts Expansion Initiative, a 6-year, $10 million effort to expand arts instruction in public schools. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Jonathan. I guess it's now time for me to admit that I'm probably the only non-artist on any of these panels, or possibly in the room, so I hope you'll let me out alive. But I am a passionate advocate for the central role that arts education can play in the life of cities, but also in urban school systems. So that's a little bit of what I'll talk about today. I want to thank the Houston Arts Alliance and the Kinder Institute for putting together this conference, for generating such excellent research, and also a special thanks to David Lake, who I understand from the Houston Endowment, who was responsible for my being here in the great state of Texas. As an arts education advocate, I can't tell you how excited I was for Houston to see the results of your survey, and really the remarkably high level of support for the role of the arts, the value of arts education, and dare we say it, a commitment to the possibility of public funding for the arts. And in Boston, we've really used philanthropic support as a catalytic lever to push greater public funding of arts education in the schools. So the results of your survey really bode well for anything that Houston should decide to undertake as you move forward, particularly focused around arts education. So just briefly, I will tell you a little bit about what we did in Boston and how we did it, with a sort of disclaimer that Boston is a quarter of the size of Houston, particularly when it comes to the school system. Our 57,000 students compared to your 200 plus, and that would be in HISD alone. It's otherwise remarkably similar in demographics, serving a largely low-income population, majority Latino and African American, about 20% students with disabilities, about 40% English language learners. But apart from that, take anything I say with a grain of salt and then multiply it by 4 to apply it to Houston. So that said, as we began to launch our arts expansion initiative in Boston, there are, apart from the data, there are sort of 4 themes to what we did and how we did it that might be relevant for you here. The first is that we took very much a data-driven approach. We started with data because we found that that was a powerful way to cut through historical perceptions, anecdotes, and turf, in some cases, not all. And so that was very important. The second is sort of the value of an inside-outside strategy between arts partners, funders, and the school system, and the role of an intermediary as a neutral facilitator or a somewhat neutral facilitator. I'm rarely described as neutral. An accountability agent, but and also someone to keep the trains running on time. In any sort of coordinated citywide initiative, you need someone designated to play that role of implementer and manager. The third is the leverage provided by substantial philanthropic engagement. And here I mean not just money, but leadership and visibility. So the lead funders behind the Boston Arts Expansion Initiative were at the table at the outset. And both at the program officer and at the trustee level play a major role on all of the sort of working committees and advisory board, bringing tremendous credibility and visibility to the initiative. And the last, and I think this is quite important, is the critical role of visible civic leadership. And that means ideally the mayor and absolutely the superintendent. In Boston, we were fortunate to have both. I can say that EdVestors has been working in Boston for 10 years. We didn't always have a superintendent who was a huge advocate for the arts. When we did, under Superintendent Carol R. Johnson, who arrived in just prior to the launch of this initiative in Boston, that immediately made it a citywide effort. What I will say is that for anything you should undertake here, depending on the level of support of a superintendent in any of the districts in which you might choose to work, you basically have two choices. Either if they already see the value of arts in the context of schools, then you have to figure out a way to develop a substantive plan. So it isn't just announcements and bells and whistles, but something that changes things on the ground. And that was our goal. If they are not inclined to see the role of arts in an urban school system, then you have to figure out a way to convince them. And you really have to figure out a way to embed it in their set of priorities, but clearly to push them beyond a narrow definition of those priorities if they don't currently include the arts. So good luck with that, but it's critical. So the way we got things started, before we set any tactical goals, what we really tried to do is make sure that we established a joint vision. And the overriding goal that we set was simultaneously around access, equity, and quality. So one is about more, and or two are about more, and one is about better. And it was really based on a vision of the powerful role that arts can and should play in an urban school system. In terms of the data, when we moved from vision to strategies, we turned to the data. And what the data showed us in Boston, first of all, what we did was the first ever system-wide inventory of what kids got. So everyone says to me all the time, we can't get the data, we don't know the data, we don't know how much arts is. School systems can tell you how many teachers they have. Arts partners, nonprofit arts and cultural organizations can tell you how many schools they're in. It's often very rare for someone to be able to tell you what are the kids receiving. So we shifted the data from a focus on what adults deliver to what kids get. We get a 97% response rate from every school leader in the city of Boston. And we measure by minute, by discipline, by school, how much arts are kids getting regardless of who delivers it. So regardless of whether it's an external teaching artist during the school day or an in-school arts instructor. And what we found was that the glass was about 2/3 full, which was good news up through grade 8, but deplorably low at the high school level, where only about 1/4 of the students had access to any art over the course of a school year. We also found, quite interestingly, what we came to call random inequity. So that the inequities in the percentages of kids getting a lot of arts were not conglomerated by neighborhood, by race, by class, by whether or not they were high-performing or low-performing schools. We're a school-based management district like Houston, site-based, I think you call it here. So that means that the decisions of adults drive the culture of a school and the resources that they provide in that school. So that was particularly interesting. We also found that 25% of the arts being delivered during the school day was already coming from external arts partner organizations and teaching artists. We found that there was a remarkable lack of coordination and alignment. And the last thing we found from our best practice research of other districts is that the Boston Central Arts Office had really atrophied over the prior 10 to 15 years and was much smaller than comparable urban arts districts. So using that data and using the vision, we settled on a 3-part strategy that hit all 3 of those areas. The first was more arts for kids, so to expand direct arts instruction. The second was to build the capacity of the schools and the central office to sustain an expanded arts education system over time so that this wasn't a brief shining moment in Boston's history, never to be repeated again. And the third was to strengthen partnership coordination to leverage more resources. I'm going to skip right over this one, but the basic story here is that we started small and went big. So we started with a $60,000 planning grant through my organization's urban investment portfolio in 2008, designed the plan, launched a set of citywide goals with a major report in February of 2009. We started out with a 3-year goal. It's now a 6-year through 2015, $10 million initiative. The majority of that raised locally in Boston, and then a big chunk coming. We're quite fortunate to have received a $4 million Wallace Foundation grant, but the bulk of it, $5.5 million, is coming from local philanthropy. So this is where we got. So in the first 3 years of the initiative, 14,000 more kids in Boston out of a system of 57,000 are receiving arts during the school day. So we went from 2/3 to now 9 out of 10 kids reaching our weekly year-long benchmark up through grade 8, and roughly doubled the percentage of high school students with access to any art at all, even if it's an 8-week residency or a semester. So we are well on our way, but not all the way there to the 100% goal. The funding I already mentioned is a mix of local and national, but I think the most important piece here is that the private philanthropy, which was really used as a lever to get everyone aligned to the overall citywide goals of this initiative, is really dwarfed by the public investment. So not only were the schools already investing back in 2009 about $16 million a year, but since this initiative launched with strong leadership both from the superintendent and the foundations, as well as our sort of facilitator role, that number has increased by 2 million annually, flowing right into increased arts teachers in the schools that are then augmented by the external teaching artists who bring in culturally relevant and culturally diverse instruction, as well as additional disciplines beyond those that that particular teacher might be able to provide in that school. Here, all I'll say about this is we took extra time to get a lot of people involved in the design of the long-term plan. Would have been a lot faster if we'd locked 5 people in a room and had them write it, but it wouldn't have been as rich and it wouldn't have been theirs. And ownership and engagement and accountability is a critical part of our tactic. This is a little bit about what we're doing next. I'll be happy to make the slide deck available. And then the last thing I'll say is that we didn't just go after arts because of the whole child, and we rarely went after arts because it increases math scores. What we really centered, my organization is actually not an arts organization. We're an urban school improvement organization. We went after arts because it was a huge equity issue, but it also relates to the broader fabric of what schools are trying to do in terms of student engagement, school climate, and parental choice of schools. So my organization also is the lead funder of an effort to increase algebra in the 8th grade. You can't teach them algebra if they're not coming to school. And that's one of the central roles that an arts education can play in a vibrant urban school system. So I'll stop there.
Laura, thank you. God bless you if you can get them to get excited about algebra.
I didn't say they were excited, but they're taking it.
Our final speaker is Joy Bailey Bryant. Joy is a skilled planner, facilitator, and outreach specialist who works with city officials, institutional leaders, developers, architects, and planners to bring life to public institutions. Joy has served in leadership positions at the Institute of Museum and Library Services and on several notable cultural planning projects, including the national and public consultation process for the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. In addition, Bryant has provided strategic leadership to cultural planning projects here in Texas, in Richardson, in Buffalo, New York, in Saudi Arabia, New York City, Memphis, Hong Kong, and very recently, Chicago. Welcome, Joy.
That makes me sound so just divergent. I tell you, like I can't quite decide where to be. I have to begin by remarking and congratulating, like everyone else, you for your level of collaboration amongst the Houston community. Notice I did not say among the Houston arts community, because one of the things that we've all been remarking upon all day is that you've brought to the table the arts, you've brought to the table the corporate community, the funding community. You have really been able to do something that I'm going to talk a bit about, which is planning culturally, bringing the arts to every aspect of the community. So I have to say it's very lovely to see, and that we don't see that a lot. So I'm here to talk a little bit more about doing that to the next level, taking the next steps, cultural planning in general. Actually, well, we can go straight to this slide. Why a cultural plan? I had one right before it, which my official title is that I'm a principal consultant with Lord for cultural planning, where I lead up, as Jonathon mentioned, our cultural planning department. And one of the things we talk a lot about is why a cultural plan, why is it important? Dr. Kleinberg's research study discussed 3 fundamental transformations that are reshaping the Houston community as well as America. And those actually equal up to the reasons for a cultural plan. When you have this restructured economy, the changing of the demographics, and the recognition of the focus of the quality of life, a cultural plan addresses all of these things by recognizing that culture is a connector across all of these different areas. We're going a little backward. I'll go back to the next slide. But that's the reason why a cultural plan would be useful. This slide just talks a little bit about my firm, which is Lord Cultural Resources. We have all these offices in all these different places across the globe, but what that really means is that we know how to make the global local. So we know about local adaptation of great global examples. But what's appropriate in Saudi Arabia may not be appropriate in Houston, but it will give us a context for understanding some of the things that are happening here in Houston. So that's essentially what our company does. You can go to the next. Oh, I'm the one doing it. Okay. So what is a cultural plan? A cultural plan is where a vision meets strategy. This, as I mentioned, it's the next step of taking all of this information, the research and data from the studies that have come forward, from the arts education information, bringing that all together to create a roadmap, sitting back and saying, where is that saying that Houston as a region, where is that saying that we want our arts community to go, we want our community overall to go, and how do we make that happen? What are the priorities for making that happen? We talk about giving voice to culture. It marries the top priorities for culture with urban planning. So it brings all of those together. And the beneficiaries of a cultural plan include community members, residents, tourists, people who are invested in your community. How do we make this happen? There are 4 big areas for the creation of a cultural plan. Essentially, massive amounts of public community engagement. And it's very important because, as Laura was talking about the stakeholders, it's very important to engage with all of the different layers of communities who will be participating or be the actual recipients, beneficiaries of the cultural plan, users. You want to make sure that you engage them on levels where they can be reached. If it's a community that is multiracial, multi-ethnic, you want to have smaller workshops, you want to have town hall meetings, you want to have where you actually come into a conference where they're going to be present. You may want to go to a neighborhood association meeting. You want to do all of the things that are going to be necessary to reach people who are not necessarily going to call themselves a cultural participant, because everyone will be the beneficiary and user of a cultural plan. So the first big element is public engagement. Then there's research, the use of all of this data in collecting more data about what's happening on the ground in Houston, in Texas, in the region, also what's happening nationally and globally. These are cultural trends, but also these are economic trends. These are public safety trends. These are quality of life trends. Understanding what's happening across the globe and how, when you bring that home to the Houston region, what that will mean here. There's another piece here that's really important in cultural planning, which is innovation. And we define innovation as creativity and problem solving coming together to create this kind of fireball thing of innovation. And Houston is with its healthcare and kind of technology lead is actually really well placed for this, because the understanding that bringing together creativity with engineering, creativity with the technology sector, creativity with healthcare ends up creating more innovative products, more innovative services, and it just becomes a new place, a new environment. And finally, getting buy-in from governmental organizations, corporations, arts organizations, cultural organizations. All of those four pieces come together to create the greater Houston cultural plan. That's how you bring that all together. What a cultural plan can do for a community is essentially it can build capacity amongst the existing assets. That basically means it strengthens the arts community particularly, because now you have a real understanding across this, I keep talking about this planning culturally, across different sectors, that culture is not only in one lane, that it flows across transportation, it flows across into public safety, into health and human services. So the idea that arts organizations are of use, and we never want to talk about arts as a tool, but arts organizations can be beneficial in enhancing public safety. So we're able to create this capacity building. We also are identifying emerging initiatives. What's really something that's growing in Houston, in this region, something that's organically come about that may not have been recognized before, but it's organically here. But let us harness that energy and say, this is a sector that we want to further. We want to give it food. We want to grow it. And how can we do that? We can do that through the arts. We also have, the last one is that cultural participation. Cultural planning, because of that large piece with the public, you kind of do this massive push. It's just as this survey had front page above the fold in the Houston Chronicle, we've done cultural plans where these are big public meetings where people are getting together to talk about their needs in general, and then also their needs for culture. So of course it gets attention. People it gets on newspaper front pages. You have news stories about it. It has blogs. It has websites or Facebook and Twitter conversations are happening around culture. So people who would not normally be paying attention to culture are now saying, hey, it's not It's actually something that involves me. I'm interested in classic cars. That's actually a cultural endeavor. We're having conversations around that. Let me participate. So it increases that cultural participation level. I will give you one little side thing that's kind of funny. We talked about, when I was getting ready for this talk, we talked about innovation and how innovation is really important in moving cities forward. And one of the things, we looked at one of our studies and we said, well, Houston is ranked 87th on the Innovative Cities Top 100 ranking in 2011, which is up from 2010, which where the city was not ranked at all. So that means that Houston is just now emerging in this innovation sector, but that it has that opportunity to grow and to take its self to the next level. So I'm an Atlanta, Georgia native, and so I said, well, where is Atlanta on that list? And I will say that it did not appear. So I was a little bit nonplussed, I think is the word. but I will say that innovation is particularly important in a city moving forward. So that also leads to that planning culturally piece that I'm talking about. I spoke a little bit about the value of the process, the investment in the civic engagement, how people begin to understand where they can figure into a cultural, they can participate in culture and how they are currently participating in culture. It also starts citywide conversations. As I said, these conversations get pretty fierce, they get pretty big, and it's exciting for people to talk about culture in their city. This results in identification of task partners, resources, just as you all are doing with your multiple partners coming together in collaboration. More partners begin to come to the surface, and it makes culture bigger. Ultimately, it's not just about a cultural plan, it's this planning culturally that I've been talking about across the board. And what that means on many city objectives is that there are synergies between culture and city departments. That means that there is a person who is thinking about culture sitting in the room in every department. Some cities actually have a cultural officer in each department. So in the Department of Economic Development, there is a cultural partner, there is a cultural officer. In the Department of Transportation, there is a cultural officer. Department of Public Safety, you get the idea, there's a cultural partner. Someone sitting in the room whose process is to think about where can culture assist in getting us to these goals that we have for the Department of Transportation. I'll talk a little bit about, actually I'll tell you right now, for the city of Chicago, we're doing a cultural plan. It's one of my impact examples. And with the city, their Department of Transportation, as a result of the cultural plan, has started this thing called intersections, and it's planning for people. So in the Department of Transportation, they are thinking about how culture can assist them in creating friendlier streets, in creating better parks. So I need to move faster. And so it's just the use of culture across the board. Finally, I'll talk about, these last two slides are about the impacts of a cultural plan on a region. The Basque region, which is in the north of Spain, many of you will know it because it's where Bilbao is. Bilbao is the capital of the Basque province. The Basque region commissioned us to do a cultural plan because the city, obviously Bilbao was an enormous boon to the city, to tourism, but people were coming there, going to the museum. They would stay in the hotels, but they were not engaging very much with the city. The city wanted to change that. They wanted to understand how they might engage visitors, engage residents in the more than 40 museums and cultural organizations that were in the Basque region throughout, not just the city, but throughout the region, so that there could be some realization of the benefits that Bilbao actually brought to them. This understanding was that at the end of the day, we actually created this type of officership, this overarching museum network. I apologize, a museum network of the over 40 museums, and then a cultural network that encompassed all of the organizations to work together. This is just one of the many, many things that came out of the plan to move forward, so that the cultural organizations were a part of the strategic plan that the Guggenheim Bilbao did the very next year at the completion of the cultural plan. So they were sitting at the table for the planning that Guggenheim Bilbao was doing, so that they all were able to work together. So as I said, that's just one small thing that came out of that plan, but it had big implications. And the last one was the city of Chicago. I told you a little bit about that, but I will say that when I talk about people becoming so interested in culture who are not cultural participants, we put the draft city plan went online in July, and since July, it's now September, we've had over 15,000 downloads of that plan. So that means that people who are outside of the normal, what we call cultural participants, are actually quite interested in and invested in cultural planning. So that's all I'll say. I'll end there.
Great, thank you, Joy. Thank you, all three of you, for condensing a lot of information into a short period of time. I think we have just a couple minutes for a few questions. Yes, ma'am? I don't see who that is, but...
I have a question that is in reference to the SNAP survey.
Mm-hmm.
I had to write it down so I wouldn't lose track of the other presentations. But looking at the, thank you very much. Looking at the map from the SNAP survey of where arts graduates end up, I'm curious about the movement which occurs upon graduation, as in where artists are trained versus where they end up. Compared to many of the other cities pictured, Houston does not appear to be as significant as a landing pad for those graduates, and that seems to be a little curious to me given our city's entrepreneurial spirit. So my question is this: how, in your opinion, and I think this actually applies to most of you up there, do we retain that talent and attract talent to build it here?
That's a great question. I think that trajectory could be mined out of those data, though we haven't done that yet. So we don't know what the retention or attrition rate is among art students in one community, Houston or another. I'm not even going to venture an answer. I want to encourage you to pursue a PhD and do that for a dissertation. It's a great question because, I mean, you look at New York. I mean, New York City has some of the great training institutions in the arts, but also is a huge magnet and retainer of those young artists, even given the gigantic obstacles of the cost of living in New York. One often hears that we have to make it more affordable for artists to live in our community. And the trouble is, New York is the great counterexample of that. New York is unbelievably expensive to live in, and nonetheless, young artists, performers, actors find their way there and manage somehow to do it. I will venture this with some confidence. Artists, performers tend to attract other artists and performers. There's a critical mass that has to be achieved. And you've got to get there. My perception living in Austin is that Houston does great at this, frankly. Austin incubates a lot of young talent, and then they come to Houston to actually make a living, which is hard to do in Austin. So let me know if you want to pursue a PhD.
Sir, right here.
I'm delighted to hear that Houston is cool. As somebody who directed the Eastman School for 24 years in Rochester, I can tell you that in Rochester we always thought that there were two seasons there, winter and the 4th of July. Put another way, the weather all over Texas from now until the 1st of May is among the most salubrious in the country. I'd like to make a dream for the future of collegiate education in the state of Texas in all of the major university campuses in the cities to begin with, in Houston and San Antonio and El Paso, Austin, Fort Worth, and Dallas to begin with, to see what we could do about putting on each college campus an outdoor performing arts center for theater, music, dance, whatever we have on that campus, where the performances of our own brilliant students would take place at lunchtime in front of an audience of other young Texans who are changing class. As it is, we're all isolated in our music buildings. But if we could get outside of the music building into the middle of the campus, we would do a tremendous amount of good for Texan leadership in the future through the arts.
Thank you. Did you hear that, Joy? Perfect cultural planning initiative.
I hear.
So my name is Reginald Adams. I'm a public artist and CEO of the Museum of Cultural Arts Houston. And I'm going to pluck something straight out of the survey. On the second page, it reads, to compete with other metropolitan areas across the nation, Houston will need to develop into a more aesthetically and environmentally appealing urban destination. So we've recently received a commission in Austin, Texas, where we were talking to some UT students about the commission, the public art work there. And the follow-up was from the Arts and Public Places coordinator, where she mentioned that the City of Austin is currently managing over 60 public art commissions funded by the City of Austin, which immediately raised the question, where does Houston stand? I love the results of the survey, Dr. Kleinberg, but we immediately went back to our staff this summer, and I put our folks to work and some interns in calling every major city's public art program to see where we stand in relationship to what we're spending on public art. And what we discovered is Houston is 0 on the map. And so how do we take this information and what's in this survey about how we need to make Houston a more aesthetically pleasing place and leverage our resources through the Houston Arts Alliance or through the city to meet the challenges of the future? And I'd like to direct that to the CEO, Jonathon Glues.
Yeah, thank you, Reginald. 2 quick comments on that. Number 1, great cultural planning initiative. That's exactly the type of thing that a cultural plan addresses. Our Percent for Art program is addressed at vertical construction, so construction of new buildings. The reason why Austin has so much more money for public art is because their ordinance also is applied to horizontal. So every road, every sewer, every sidewalk that is laid or built in that town has a public art mandate. Ours is only vertical. So we're tremendously limited in comparison to other cities. So that again is a great example of something that could be included in a cultural plan. One more question, sir?
Yeah, Bill Lanigan. I'm with the Art Institute here in Houston. I'm an architect, and I came here in 1976, back when it was still a regional, somewhat contained city. I'd like to talk a little bit about that first question that we got. I've been at the Art Institute, and we do career training, graphic design, interior design, which is what I am in charge of. And our graduates tend to go into the non-creative companies here in town and perform creative services within those environments. But the answer to your question is very simple. We really don't educate very many fine artists here in the applied arts. We do a wonderful job in the performing arts. We have world-class representation in the theater, dance, symphony, grand opera. Few cities can really match what we've been able to accomplish here. Our great deficit, unfortunately, I think Dean Dempster is being generous. His artists come here because there is such a dearth of locally trained talent. If we have a single reason why some of our art profile, the contours of our art community here are in deficit mode, it's because we really have no singular nationally recognized institute of fine and applied arts in the city. So I think if we could address that issue, and I'm sure you don't disagree with me, we really have a crying need for that. So.
Before I turn it back to Dr. Kleinberg to wind us up, I'd just like to thank the panel for coming to Houston and spending the day with us. You're all doing wonderful work. I would like to say just 3 final comments on this, I believe. First, thank you, Houston Endowment, for your vision and generosity in making this happen through the Kinder Institutes. And thank you to our colleagues at the Houston Endowment, David and Debbie, for your real steadfast work in the arts community here. We appreciate you so much. Thank you. And I'd say coming out of this first survey, which we all hope is the first survey of many, we have a great need for a focus on arts education in our public schools. I think there is a great deal of interest in moving us into a cultural planning process for not just the city but the region. And going back to the first panel, we are experiencing so quickly an evolution, and how do we invest in our institutions that serve all of us is such an important question for all of us. So with that said, Dr. Kleinberg, thank you so much, and please.
Jonathan's just said all the things I was going to say. Thank you all so much for coming. We have a reward for you because you stayed. Again, thanks to the Houston Endowment, we have a reception that will be held right outside these doors, and a good chance for us to continue this discussion, to talk to some of the panelists. We're just tremendously grateful to all of you and to Houston Endowment and HAA and all the people at the Kinder Institute for making this possible, and for all the support that you've given us. Thanks so much, and come and join us for the reception right now as you get up. Thank you.